you want to use as little chalk as you possibly can and have like just one nice thin coating. If you fall off your problem because your hand slipped, the answer is not to go and feverishly put on tons and tons of chalk and then LeBron James clap that stuff up in the air. The answer is probably to take like 5 or 6 minutes, cool your body down, get away from it, go sit in the shade and or below a fan or something like that, and then put a thin layer of chalk, brush up all your holds, get your breath back, and that's gonna play a big role in it. Your heart rate, your breathing rate, your body temperature, all that stuff really impacts what your grip's gonna feel like.
Kevin Brown, welcome to the Testpiece podcast, man. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, Josh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Kevin, you've been climbing for 27 years. Somehow I haven't bumped into you, and you're a damn good climber. You've climbed into double digits, and I knew you had a really deep love for this sport when I was emailing you, and then you emailed me back at like 4 a.m. because you're going up to the Alpine, which you're based in Denver. So Alpine, I don't know, where were you going that day?
Lincoln Lake. Yeah. I'm on the dad circuit. So, you gotta condense your shifts. We only get a couple hours. We don't get all day usually.
Dude, Lincoln Lake that's up there, and I don't know if that's like easy access in my opinion. That hike out, I don't know. That's a tiring hike out there.
You got to work on your fitness. But yeah, I mean, when you have obligations, you hike fast, and if the thunderstorms roll in, you hike faster.
Yeah, I've been there, done that. Okay, so Kevin, during your long climbing career, you've contributed a ton to the community. I just found out you were one of the founders of the Denver Bouldering Club, which amazing setting. I feel like if you're in Denver, you know about the Denver Bouldering Club, but I didn't quite realize that it was the very first real climbing gym in Denver. I don't want to go too far into that, but thanks for doing that, man. I feel like that's a big contribution to the community in itself.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that was, geez, like 15 or 16 years ago. Starting a climbing gym back then was a lot different. Me and two buddies, we scraped together some money, and yeah, it was like a 24/7 gym. Well, it wasn't even a gym; it was like a private club to start. But yeah, it's still going. It's great.
Yeah, whenever I go in there, it's just got that kind of old school vibe, and the people at the front desk are really cool and nice, and everyone cares about good setting. It's got that non-corporate vibe, and so that's still alive today, man.
It certainly is.
Kevin, I even though that's incredible, I think that your biggest contribution, perhaps what you're best known for now, is that you founded Friction Labs a decade ago. Friction Labs makes chalk, some of the best chalk. I think you might argue the best chalk. Uh, but I think one of the biggest things about Friction Labs for me is that when you guys came out, it kind of completely changed the conversation around chalk. In my memory, chalk was just kind of a whatever. I came out of gymnastics, and chalk was just there, just a commodity.
hmm
And you knew you had to have it, but you didn't care too much about that. But when you guys hit the scene, it really brought quality, effectiveness, like front and center. Like, this stuff is something you're using all the time. So how about we have a discussion about how to use it the best way? And that's why I'm psyched to have you on here today, man. Chalk is obviously one of the most important things we use. I mean, you need chalk, you need shoes. Actually, I don't know. There's some people who might disagree. You may not even need shoes. You need chalk, or at least I need chalk, maybe because I'm a sweaty guy. And so today, I'm just psyched to hear from you as an expert on all things chalk, like what it's made of, best practices, how to use it, and even what the future of chalk might look like. So thanks for coming on, and maybe we can get started with how you got into climbing and just how that ultimately led you to founding Friction Labs.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate this opportunity. So, I played college football. I was at the University of Iowa, and I realized I was not a Big Ten football player. And my roommate, it was like a snowy night, and he was like, "Hey, we should go to the climbing wall." And I'm like, "The climbing what?" And I'm like, I'd never actually even heard of rock climbing at that point. And so we rode some bikes with the snow. I had a pair of Chuck Taylor Converse on, and I was a little bit bigger than I think I was definitely bigger than anyone else in the gym, and I loved it. Next day, I took my biggest elective, the biggest book from my elective classes, and sold it. Bought a pair of Boreal Ace shoes, and I went climbing at the little local wall at the university, and luckily there was this little art installment called Hancher Rocks, which was like three limestone boulders that had, I don't know, probably like 5'8" to 5'11" type boulder problems on the arretes in the face, and yeah, we just obsessed about trying to figure out how to get up those, and that was kind of my start into climbing.
Dude, did you say Boreal Aces? I totally remember those. They had the different suits. Yeah, the suits of cards on
Yeah.
there. Like I just saw. You know, what's funny is I was just in Squamish, and I saw this guy wearing them, and he no his kid. He had given them to his kid. I was like, are those Boreal Aces? How old are those shoes? Yeah, I don't think most people listening will know, but those were kind of like, I don't know. They were just kind of the very basic classic shoe from 25 years ago. Very cool.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So you were a little bit you were a little bit bigger, and yeah, yeah, yeah. Football players maybe isn't the best sport coming into climbing, and maybe the only way football players hear about climbing is to make fun of the skinny climber guys like me. But yeah, how did that set the tone for your climbing?
I think anything that was like a big hold, what like if you could kind of wrestle your way up a climb, like cracks and off widths and things like that, those were stuff that I kind of gravitated towards. Bouldering, which is kind of the only thing I do now, that was it was pretty fringe at the time. Like not that many people bouldered. I don't even think bouldering pads were around at that point. Um, yeah, like I'm from Wisconsin, so I would go climbing at Devil's Lake on like Purple Quartzite, and you know, you do a bunch of top roping, and then eventually like lead stuff, and you know, but like there's tons and tons of climbs in like that 5'6" to 5'8", 5'9" range. And that's where I was for a while. But I was like, you know, like 230, 240. Started to realize that gravity is unkind on the very large. You know, kind of worked on getting a little bit lighter for climbing. I'm still bigger than your average person at the boulders and things like that. But yeah, that was my start. And honestly, I fell in love with it. I loved the movement. I loved the people that I met. You know, like being a climber was such a rarity back then that if someone else was a climber, you were kind of like instant friends. And you know, it doesn't matter how weird or whatever, you just tolerated anyone because it was like, oh, you'll go climbing, cool, let's go. um, so yeah, that was sort of my start, and you know, I've just kind of stuck with it, and I've climbed geez, like all around the world at this point, around most of the classic places in the US. And yeah, I'm lucky to be in Colorado. We've got year-round outdoor climbing, which yeah, some of the best stuff is up in the Alpine right now, which is great.
Yeah, I wish I had the Alpine right now. It's hot. I'm in the Sierras, but it's hot. So is that what brought you to Denver? Was climbing?
It was, yeah, yeah. I was a high school science teacher in North Carolina right out of college, and started to sell molecular biology equipment. And a friend of mine was like, "What are you doing out there?" It was like my old college roommate, and well, he's like, "I got a house. You can stay with me and get your feet like underneath you if you want to move out here." And yeah, so I got a job over the phone like 3 weeks later, and sold all my stuff, packed up my Honda Civic, and drove out. And yeah, I've been here ever since. 17 years. Yeah.
I love how our random sports just can totally dictate where you end up living, which really dictates a lot of stuff. And even that whole thing of when you meet someone who's a climber, you're instant friends. I still feel like that, even though it was more French back then. You're like, you actually like climbing like me. And it is
Mhm.
crazy. I always think it's a little wild where you will just meet someone to belay you and trust your life to them and do it really quickly and just be like, oh, you climb too? Okay, please don't drop me and kill me. Let's climb together. Like, let's do it. So tell me how this, you were a science teacher, you sold interesting medical equipment, and you end up in Denver. How did this all lead to you becoming, the founder of a climbing company? Well, two climbing companies. How did it lead to Friction Labs?
So I've never been a great climber, but I really love climbing, and like I've always had projects like any climber, and I had a chalk that I was using. I was Frank Endo chalk at the time, and I went to REI to buy some. They were all sold out, so the guy told me that it's all the same stuff. So I got some other stuff, and I went out to go climb. And this project, I had like sort of the first crux like really dialed in, and I thought like it was a good condition day, everything, and I could not hold on to anything. I felt like I had grease on my hands. So I came home. My wife's a geologist, so I like was not in the best spirits, and I was like, "So where does chalk come from?" And she's like, "Well, it comes from this mineral and stuff like that, but that's not my expertise." I have a friend that has a X-ray fluorescence lab, and X-ray fluorescence, if you shoot that at anything, it'll tell you the ratio of elements that are there. So I contacted him. He's like, yeah, I'll test whatever you have. And so I went to REI and I bought every brand of chalk, every style of chalk. I think I had like 15 or 16 samples. And we shot them. And so magnesium carbonate at the time, it was marketed, every chalk was marketed as 100% magnesium carbonate. So magnesium carbonate is one magnesium, one carbon, and three oxygen. So it should be like, that's all you should that should show up if it's 100%. So we tested all of these chalks and none of them came back as 50% or better. There were all of these fillers and contaminants and different stuff. And the crazy thing was they were all different. Like none of them, like there were a few that tested pretty similar, but they were all different. So I was like, well, this is interesting. So I started contacting chemical manufacturing, chemical supply companies, and ordering every version of magnesium carbonate. Which it's funny because for like the first 3 years of Friction Labs, everyone would be like, "Dude, chalk's chalk. Like, what are you doing?" And I'm like, that's the biggest misnomer out there. From the source of the magnesium to how it's synthesized to its particle size to its purity to its pH, all those things play huge factors in how it ends up performing. So uh, I started ordering a whole bunch and settled on this pharmaceutical grade because pharmaceutical grade, which actually isn't 100% magnesium carbonate, it's like 99.1%. But if you've taken a white pill before, chances are you've consumed the exact same material that is our chalk. Not our chalk, but the exact same material. And from there, started to really geek out on the particle sizes, and then finally the pH. And I was just it was like a labor of love. I'm like, well, if I can make myself really good chalk, then I can finally send my project. So I made what I thought was a really good batch of chalk, and I brought it into the DBC and told a bunch of my friends, "Hey, I made this chalk. Check it out. Tell me if you like it." And I'm in the side talking to my buddy Thomas, and I look over my shoulder, and two of my friends are like pouring my chalk bucket into their chalk buckets. And I'm like, "Wait, what are you doing? Like, this stuff's amazing. Like, I've got to have it." I'm like, "You like it better than your other chalk?" And they're like, "Yeah, this is great." I'm like, "Would you buy the chalk?" And they're like, "Yeah, I would buy this chalk. It's way better than my chalk." So from there, my business partner now, Kia Kalantari, we put together a website and launched a website. And like she's like 2 months later, someone bought a single unit of chalk for $14. The next month, someone bought a unit of chalk for $17. And now, like 10 years later, I think we created the premium chalk market. We're in about 27 countries and a couple thousand doors across the U.S. And yeah, it's been an awesome ride. Like I feel lucky, fortunate, and yeah, it's great.
I feel like I could see the light bulb going off in your head when they were dumping their your chalk into their buckets. You're like, oh, yeah. I actually, I'm going to take this moment to say this is not an advertisement. I have been a full price paying Friction Labs buyer for, I think, since you guys came out. I really remember it, and still to this day, I still pay full price. And I just wanted to talk to you, Kevin, because I freaking love chalk, and it's a really important part of climbing. And as I said, I just want to get to grill you about it. And already it's blowing my mind when you go into just all the, the chemistry, right? Like, just because you said something like the chalk isn't chalk, but theoretically, if it is, if it's 100% or 99 point something percent magnesium carbonate. But
Mhm.
what it made me wonder is what is in the other chalk. If you were getting a 50% batch of magnesium carbonate in
Mhm.
whatever brand, what the heck were they filling it with?
So the biggest contaminant is calcium carbonate. So calcium carbonate is the same stuff that is chalkboard chalk, and they seem like they would be very similar. But so if you think of both of them as like a box, right? Calcium carbonate, the way that it like binds to water, the water attaches to the outside of the box. And then if you think of all your chalk particles, you're going to have basically like slippery particles going back and forth. So if you feel like your chalk is greasy or greasy for the most part, that means that there's calcium carbonate that's in it. And like if you take chalkboard chalk and you try and use it for climbing chalk, you would feel that like it's just a greasy mess in your hands. And the reason that there's so much calcium carbonate is magnesite is the mineral that gets refined to make magnesium carbonate, and magnesite and calcite are like they just like they're ubiquitous. They're just always together wherever you find those naturally occurring. And the reason that it's there is it costs money and effort to remove the calcium carbonate. So that's why it shows up a lot. And I will say we test almost every type of chalk that's out there. And when we first started this 10 years ago, there was a significant difference of what's in the market. And since we've come out, and I think we've done some education around chalk and what makes better chalk, there are brands that have like a far cleaner version of chalk. But I think like like I'm a big coffee nerd. I love coffee. And when someone says chalk is chalk, it's like, well, yeah, sure, coffee is coffee too, right? Like if you shot X-ray fluorescence at any coffee beans, whether they were Starbucks, Folgers, or like your favorite place that you go get your espresso from, um, they would all chemically show up the exact same. But anyone who drinks coffee knows that it's a radically different experience as a consumer, and it's almost the exact same thing with chalk.
Mm. I'm drinking coffee, right? I used to have a coffee company, so I hear you. And being out of the Bay Area definitely would offend many people telling them that coffee is just coffee. I also gotta say that it makes me feel better hearing that some of the pills that we might take, the white pills, have magnesium carbonate in it, because I gotta tell you, I've accidentally eaten quite a bit of chalk. Just I don't wash my hands when I'm out in the desert climbing, and I eat my sandwich, and I'm sure I have consumed quite a bit. Any, yeah, anything on that health side of things, like, is there a dangerous, is there any issues with both eating chalk or some of the like chalk dust that we see in the gym, which now we're getting more filters and stuff, which I know it's good to filter stuff out, but am I going to die of white lung?
Um, I don't think so. Like Robin Ebersfield, famous climbing coach. Uh, I met her early on. She was a huge Friction Labs fan, and she told me that when she was in France, when they ran out of chalk, they would go to the pharmacist and tell them that they had an upset stomach, and they would give the pharmacist would give them magnesium carbonate, and then they would just go use it for climbing. So if you have like, it doesn't taste good, but if you have an upset stomach or heartburn, that's basically what Tums and a bunch of the other like antacids are. They just add some sugar and stuff to it, so it's a little more palatable. But more specifically to your question, so there's been a handful of studies about like what does chalk do, and like if you're breathing it, and it can definitely like irritate, like on a temporary basis, but there's never been any long-term like impact from it. And if you look at like just the natural experiment of people climbing in climbing gyms over the last couple of decades, or people have been using chalk in gymnastics since like the 20s, and in weightlifting gyms, things like that. There's no one like there's never been a big case of the white lung or anything like that that people tend to joke about from time to time.
Yeah, I'm sure you should probably still put a disclaimer out there. Try not to inhale chalk or eat lots of chalk. It's just probably not a good call. I'm sure that in any quantity, it's probably not so great if you really, because I know I remember I was my other sport where I used a little bit of chalk was I did some powerlifting, and I'll never forget this one time where I was going for a heavy squat and they had chalked up my back where you put the bar, and then my buddy comes and hits me on the back right as I'm unracking the bar, and I just deeply inhaled a huge bunch of chalk, and I was like, oh, maybe that wasn't the best. I didn't feel so great, but good to know that there's not some big like no study that tells me that I need to stop using my favorite thing.
Mm-mm. No, yeah, you should be all right. If you ate too much, you might have some disaster pants, but that's a different situation.
Do you remember that fat? When was that? There was this whole thing about eating baking soda to try to lower pH to basically try to let you get more pumped. It was a big sport climbing thing. Do you remember that
Mhm.
fad where people were just drinking baking soda and just feeling awful and trying to send hard?
Yeah, I mean, it got banned by the IOC in like the 80s. It's a banned substance for Olympic athletes for that reason.
So I have this thing where if something's banned, but it's legal, you should probably take a second look at because that means it does work. Like if it's banned, that means it does work. Okay, I never
Yeah.
I really don't want to experiment with that, but maybe one of our listeners will report because I heard mixed reports. People mainly just got stomach aches, and I don't think they really would send. I think there's more going on to sending than drinking baking
Yeah,
soda.
probably.
Uh, I you said something about uh, this super 99% pure, and I made some comment about how, oh, well, if it really is pure, then they are all the same. But I want to ask you if I'm right in thinking that, like, if chemically it's all magnesium carbonate, but is there more that goes into chalk creation than just purity? Like, is there the
Mhm.
size of it? Yeah, just like, am I wrong there? Oh, it is all the same if it's magnesium carbonate. Is there more going on than just the chemical makeup?
There's three grades of magnesium carbonate. There's recreational grade, which is what most chalk is made out of. Then there's food grade, which is like I think it's like 98 point something percent. And where that's most commonly used is actually in like brewing beer and things like that. So like in Colorado, there's like the water doesn't have any mineralization in it because it's all just snow melt. So the brewers will add things like either calcium carbonate or magnesium carbonate, and that kind of gives the beer like a different mouth feel. But like that's like there's the food grade and then there's pharmaceutical grade. And the reason that chalk's used in pharmaceuticals is it's mostly inert when it comes to like other drugs that are out there. Like it'll react with an acid 100%, but with like aspirin or ibuprofen or things like that, it's not going to interact. It's not going to have a reaction with that drug, and it presses together really easily, and it's low cost for the most part. So they can put a little bit of the active ingredient, surround it with the magnesium carbonate, like squeeze it down into a pill, and that's the most common use of pharmaceutical grade magnesium carbonate, um, especially before friction labs.
It's just funny thinking that we probably consume just as much chalk by drinking our Sen beers. Uh, just a little fun fact there on, just because you said something about coffee. When just this is just total nerdy brewing chemistry, where you don't when you brew coffee, they actually don't want like super distilled water, something that's just water, because the minerals that are typically in water help that extraction process, and you can just imagine it bumping into things and grabbing certain uh, now I'm blanking on some cool chemistry term, but yeah. So even in coffee, you need to add stuff. You don't want just super basic water.
Mhm.
Let me rephrase my question because maybe I didn't put it exactly correctly. Is there anything else that you guys do with the chalk other than just thinking about the purity? Like, is there something about like the shape or yeah, you said like pH? Like, is there any other steps of what makes chalk good for climbing other than just it being magnesium carbonate?
Yeah, so the purity is really important. The next thing is the particle size. So you could have pharmaceutical grade magnesium carbonate, but if the particle size is too big, it just feels super slippery. And another reason for like the cost of chalk is it's more expensive to refine that particle size down to sort of what we refer to as like the Goldilocks like spectrum that we use here, kind of like fits perfectly into all the little nooks and crannies on your hands. If it's too small, it ends up like stacking up on itself. And if it's too big, it feels really slippery. Like when we hire new people to our team, we kind of like give them like this whole rundown, and we have like all the different types of chalk so that they can feel the difference and like they can understand, oh, this is what happens when the particle size is too big. The last factor that really matters is the pH. So if you just have a if it's just a total powdered chalk, the pH of the chalk matters a little bit. The pH really matters when you start to form like chunks, or you're going to make like a chalk block, or we make like a chalk disc, or whatever. Like when you want like a more solid form of chalk. If the pH is off, then the chalk's going to feel really brittle and almost like kind of shardy when it breaks down, almost like a little bit sharp. And then there's like a very specific tolerance, and on one side it'll feel like kind of shardy, and then the other side it'll just like kind of end up feeling like almost like baby powder. Like it just is almost so soft that it ends up feeling slippery for that reason. So there's like you got to nail your purity, your particle size, and then the pH. And those are sort of like the three major factors that go into making good chalk. And then on pH, um, every person's different. Depending on what you eat, how you're living, what you're consuming, you can change the pH in your body. And then that's going to change the pH of your sweat, which is going to change how you um, interact with your chalk. Um, Alex Migos is one of our athletes, and he went like vegan and vegetarian a couple of years ago. And when I was talking to him, he told me how different his skin feels and how much less he sweats now that he doesn't eat meat. And like that's just his personal experience. Not making any comment on anything like that. I already get enough emails, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. But I just bring that up because what you're consuming really ends up impacting your skin's performance, which in our sport can be just the difference between make or break, no matter what level you're at.
Damn, that's interesting. Yeah, it does. I can see why people just think chalk is chalk when you look at it, but it's cool that you guys went so freaking deep. And I love the idea of having all these batches where it's like, see, you feel this like slippery, you feel this shard, I know what you're like this weird chunky, but like you can't break them. I know what you're talking about. Uh, I actually got asked now. I believe you guys sell three different styles of chalk, as in there's
Mhm,
I think you call it unicorn dust. I want to say is the more fine powder. Gorilla
mhm.
grip is the one I use, more chunky, and then I can't remember the most chunky one. I like that middle ground. Is there any difference in those types of, like, do those have different formulations, or are they just different chunks?
So chemically, they're all the same. It just comes down to how chunky it is. And it's funny. We even to this day, we still get emails from people who are like, "I love unicorn dust. It's amazing. Bam Bam, it's awful. You guys should stop selling that stuff." And then we'll get just the opposite. Like, I love Bam Bam and Gorilla Grip, but man, unicorn dust, I hate. It's everyone has their sort of like their pre-climbing chalk up ritual. And I think sometimes climbers think that chalk is more than just chalk, and sometimes they think if they just cover themselves in it, that's going to be the difference between sending their project or not. um, Newsflash, that's not how it works at all. But yeah, it's really just for different preferences.
I like that you said the hopefully send a pre-climbing ritual. I like the Gorilla Grip literally because I like crushing the bits. Like when I would stick, I also think I personally, I know you don't want to name names here, but I remember really disliking bison chalk, and that had that kind of really fine powder that felt slippery to me. And so I think I have this like bad connotation with not having chunks in it. And I just also like that feeling of breaking something right before I get on. So yeah, I think it's part of the mental.
Mhm.
Uh, I I gotta ask you. You're saying okay, so Magos, he felt a change in his body, and he saw it come through in chalk, and what that made me, or how the chalk felt and interacted with his body, and that made me wonder, how do you think people can change their experience that they're having with the chalk in a moment. So if it's really humid or it's really dry or they're really sweaty or not sweaty, sometimes I use antihydral, sometimes I don't. And just, do you have any tips or best practices for people to change if the experience they're having is a bad experience, or if they're having a good experience, what are the factors that might be why they're having a good experience currently with chalk?
So it starts with skin health. Like if you're dehydrated, like that's gonna have a real impact on how your skin's gonna show up when you're climbing. So you want your skin to you want your body and your skin to be hydrated, healthy. That's going to give it a little bit more elasticity. If it's hot and humid out, like sweat isn't just water escaping your body. There's a bunch of oils in there, and part of what putting chalk in your hands does is it's going to absorb that moisture, but it's also going to absorb the oils and stuff that are on your hands. So if you're feeling really hot and sweaty, I think if you have like a small bottle of like isopropyl alcohol that you can spray on your hands, or if you like liquid chalk, people seem to be like either love it or hate it. That has alcohol in it, so you can put that in, and that's going to kind of like reset your skin and get rid of those oils and things like that. So kind of gives you a little bit of a clean slate, and then you can put your chalk on top of that. Um, if your chalk, if it's chalk that you normally use, and that day it's just not feeling good, it's probably a result of how you've been living your life for a couple of days prior. If you're on a climbing trip and you're eating clean and living clean, as opposed to throwing back a couple of celebratory beers every night. All that stuff can kind of impact if you're eating the normal diet that you normally do, and then all of a sudden you're picking up a bunch of croissants when you're heading out to the boulders and font. That's it. All those things kind of end up impacting your skin performance and everything else, unfortunately.
Kevin, don't you dare make me not pick up croissants on the way
Oh
to
no,
font.
no,
I will that I don't care. That's at least 30% of why font is special. Please
I
don't take that
agree.
away.
I agree. Yeah.
Uh, all right. Yeah, it's just interesting. It's not putting enough effort into thinking about how our skin and the rock contact is as good as it can be, and it's something that I've discovered after 30 years. I joke that I am sweaty. And the thing is that I've always been sweaty, and I've literally just started using antihydral more recently, and it's had a profound effect on my climbing. And that's just ridiculous that I hadn't really stumbled upon it and used it with any kind of frequency until just, 29 years into what I'm doing. And so this, I love that we're getting to some of the chemistry and the physics, because I just I know it's important, but it's almost like this fabled thing that it's like, people have their rituals, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but they can't really narrow down what's going on. So I want to talk a little bit about some of that physics, where I think this sweat and moisture is part of this. Like chalk isn't sticky. You're not getting friction from the chalk. Like in fact, I think you've mentioned that it can be used as a lubricant in some
Mhm.
manufacturing processes. So how do we think about the role chalk plays? And I mean, you kind of went into it, but just can we keep picking at that a little bit?
Sure, sure. So like back in the day, in font, they used POF, right? And POF was it was like pine rosin that you put in like like a white sort of like rag, and you kind of had like a ball of it, and then you had like a loose rag, and they would put that on their hands, their shoes, on the hold, and then they would whack off like the extra stuff, and that was actually sticky, like that, like genuinely sticky. And the downside of POF is that it kind of fills in the texture and makes holds glassy and almost unusable. So that it fell out of favor. The first use of chalk was like in the 1800s, and it was actually sodium bicarbonate is what they were using. And it does an okay job of absorbing moisture. But then in the 20s, there was a pharmacist who was also a weightlifter who kind of stumbled upon magnesium carbonate, and ever like there's not a lot of research, but when you're in chalk as much as I am, you kind of know a little bit about the history. And from there, magnesium carbonate really started to show up in weightlifting gyms, in like these strongman, which was sort of like the way people used to lift weights before like modern weightlifting. They would just pick up heavy, weird things. And then by like the 1940s, magnesium carbonate was like the common used thing in gymnastics. And in climbing, we didn't get, no one used chalk until John Gill started bringing it out to the boulders. And John Gill, like hero of mine, he was like a bigger climber as well. I think he was like a $190 or something like that, doing stuff that um, even by today's standards is really impressive. So he brought it out. I think people really paid attention to how impressive he was climbing, and I think he was a real catalyst for people to start using chalk more and more and more. So that kind of like gets us to like how we got chalk in climbing. Now, to your question about like how and why it works. So um, if you have a really wet hold, chalk is okay at absorbing moisture, but you should not just like if there's like a puddle on your hold, caking that thing with chalk and then scrubbing it off, it's not the right answer. Like you can try and dry it with a t-shirt, but if it's wet, you probably should just move on and wait for that hold to be dry, instead of trying to dry it even with a fan or anything like that. What if you've ever picked up a brand new rock climbing hold, or you've felt a hold outside that didn't have any chalk on it and you didn't have any chalk on your hands? They don't feel super sticky. In fact, they can kind of feel a little bit slippery. Even though you have nothing on your hand's totally dry, it's in good condition, you're not sweaty or anything like that. So by putting the chalk on your hand and then putting chalk on the hold, there is this like at like a really microscopic level, like this connection where you can compact the chalk together that gives a little bit of adherence, which plays a role in this. And there's like 7 studies that have gone into trying to find out how chalk, like how and why chalk works. And they're all done in a lab setting. And all of them conclude that chalk is more of a lubricant than causes more friction. But every climber knows that if you have no chalk on your hands and you start even climbing on holds that have chalk, um, it it feels slippery. And as soon as we feel some slipperiness in our in our grip, and we don't have confidence in it, then kind of everything goes. Nothing works all that well. Climbing is definitely a sport where the more confidence you have in your grip and in your position, the more success you're going to have. So, does that answer your question? Or
Yeah, I really like that you talked about when you walk up to a hold outside that has no chalk on it, and then you feel it even with chalk in your hands, it doesn't feel that great. And then when you add chalk to it, it all of a sudden feels a lot better. And I didn't know quite why. It's interesting that there's some interaction between two chalked surfaces at a molecular level. And because I have seen those things where I'll see these threads or something on Reddit that's like, chalk doesn't work. You're like, oh, really? Go ahead, stop using chalk. Like if you, and they do these lab tests, and yeah, shout out. Thanks for giving us the history. POF, yeah, I've never used it, but PSA, you do not use it. It does ruin the rock. And I have heard, it's talking to some old school climber. He was like, I know we can't use POF. We should not use POF. He's like, it was pretty magical, that feeling you would get in font, sticking to those slopers with POF. But then with John Gill bringing it into climbing, I mean, thank God for John Gill. I can't believe he was 190. Now that picture of him doing the one arm front lever takes on a whole new meaning for me.
Total beast. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess his secret was chalk. Okay, so yeah, some of the stuff I wanted to ask you about was exactly that, where you were bringing it up on how to prep like an outdoor climb and why it worked like that. So this may be super in the weeds, but can we talk more about how to best use chalk on, say, an indoor hold versus an outdoor hold, or a sloper versus a crimp? Or here's one that's really interesting: is should you use chalk on no tex holds? You know what I'm talking about? Like those
Mhm.
slippery climbing holds. Yeah, just maybe we could go through some of those situations on what you think is the best way to use chalk based on the chemistry and the physics.
It's pretty simple. Whether it's a sloper, crimper, or anything, to get the best performance, first off, you want to brush the hold so there's this little residue whatsoever on that. And then when you put chalk on your hands, you want a very thin layer of chalk on your hands. I think if there's one mistake that climbers use is they use way too much chalk. And coming from a guy who sells a lot of chalk, that probably seems like counterintuitive. But if you want to get the best performance, you just want a really thin layer of chalk on your hands, clap off any excess, and hopefully there's like a breeze or something that kind of helps keep your skin a little bit cool. If you can do that, you're setting yourself up for the best success on holds, whether they're a wood hold, a plastic hold, the dual tex holds that are out there. Like standing on a dual tex hold, like how rubber interacts with a hold, is totally different than your hands. But in general, the less stuff that's on there that gives the rubber a better chance at having friction, and less material between your shoe and the hold that you're standing on. That's what you want for that. And but for your hands, yeah, you want to use as little chalk as you possibly can and have like just one nice thin coating. If you fall off your problem because your hand slipped, the answer is not to go and feverishly put on tons and tons of chalk and then LeBron James clap that stuff up in the air. The answer is probably to take like 5 or 6 minutes, cool your body down, get away from it, and go sit in the shade or below a fan or something like that, and then put a thin layer of chalk, brush up all your holds, get your breath back, and that's gonna play a big role in it. Our your heart rate, your breathing rate, your body temperature, all that stuff really impacts what your grip's going to feel like. And chalk's not magical. Like it's not going like it can't undo a bunch of bad decisions if you put yourself in that situation.
I like that. I like hearing it from you too. Don't use too much chalk. I'm pretty guilty of that. I'm the guy who comes down from a sport climb and my whole mouth is covered in chalk, like because I'm, from biting the rope, and I really, that because there's like a mental aspect of it for me too. Like I'll be sitting at rest
Mhm.
and I just, like, every hand I dip it, I dip in, and yeah, so that can be counterproductive because if you build up too much, like you were saying with those, it actually becomes not so good. It becomes a lubricant almost. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, if you have too much chalk in your hands, that's just more material that you have to apply a greater force to that hold to get the desired friction that you want. And if you think of chalk particles as little tiny tiny BBs, if you have too many BBs on there, they're going to slide against each other and create like almost a slippery sensation. Which same reason that you want to brush your holds.
How come LeBron James uses chalk? That must be the only thing I have in common with LeBron James. They use chalk in
Oh,
basketball.
so, like in basketball, they're using it. In
Really?
tennis, they used to use at Wimbledon. They used to have a can of sawdust that people would like use to dry their hands. Now they're starting to use chalk. Um, we have a bunch of baseball players that have gotten rid of their glove and they're using chalk on their hands because they have like a better connection to the bat. So yeah, I think there's like we take for granted like if you're a climber, like chalk's just like it's just part of who you are. Like you don't walk out of the gym without being covered in chalk. There's just a whole bunch of other sports out there that haven't really been turned on to it. Like we've been working with some tennis athletes since the pandemic, and they like, yeah, it's slowly coming on in a big way in tennis and pickleball right now.
Huh. Yeah, it makes me think that sawd that sounds like from the Middle Ages using sawdust to help your tennis game. I definitely remember using sand at the playground, like you pick up dirt.
Mhm.
And my daughter, who's like 4, she was saying, "Oh, I slip off the monkey bars because my hands are too slippery." And first I told her to just, use dirt. But maybe you guys need to start putting chalk bags into elementary school. Yeah.
I'd like that. I'd go
Oh,
for that. Yeah,
yeah.
my daughter loves chalk, so she uses it all the time for her monkey bar routines.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is clean your hands. It's just I know that's kind of like obvious, but in some ways, I actually sometimes used to not wash my hands right before going climbing because I wanted my hands to be really dry. And I
Hmm.
think that myth has been a little bit dispelled where just dry hands always, your hands could be dry but have a layer of grease on them, which wouldn't be so good. And so, really making sure your hands are dry or are free of any kind of contaminant they could have. Uh,
Hmm.
and actually, yeah. So let's say I've just eaten a sandwich or something. I feel like I often will just put chalk on afterwards, hoping that it does the trick. Am I wrong there? Like it may kind of absorb some of the grease or particles, but that doesn't really help, does it?
If you use some wet wipes or like a little isopropyl alcohol spray and then kind of wiped your hands off, you'd be much better served for
Mhm.
sure.
All right, good to know. Okay, on that note, tell me a little bit more about liquid chalk, which is something that I I've used, I use, but for some reason it's never been into my rotation. Just honestly, more because it's new, and I feel like I don't have the prep mentality. It's like I want to climb right now, and so I dip my fingers into my bucket. Tell me a little bit more about what makes liquid chalk different from normal chalk, and then the best way to use it.
Cool. So the first thing about liquid chalk is before you buy it, you should look at the ingredients. If you see rosin in it, you should put it down and get a different brand. There's plenty of good brands out there. Friction Labs doesn't put rosin in any of ours, but there's plenty of other great brands out there. But just make sure there's not rosin because that rosin, just like the POF, it slowly fills up the texture of holds, and it's really difficult to get out. Side note, before I answer your question, if there's too much chalk or you want to clean up chalk, all you need to use is some white vinegar, and you can just like dilute it with water. But just that weak little acid right there is enough to break up the chalk and make it really easy to clean. So, like if you have too much chalk on things, distilled or white vinegar is is your answer to cleaning it up. It might smell a little bit weird, but if you just add water, it's not too bad. So liquid chalk. So liquid chalk is typically just magnesium carbonate, some deionized water, and either like ethanol or isopropyl alcohol, and the goes on as a cream. They usually separate, so you want to shake up your liquid chalk before you put it on. And then the great thing about liquid chalk is it's a phenomenal base layer. If you look at like the best competitors in the world, like people on the pro circuit, world circuit, they all use liquid chalk. And it's this nice thin layer that gets on your hands. And if you or I started our session indoors or out with a base layer of liquid chalk, you would use significantly less chalk over the course of your session, because when it's in that creamy solution, it really gets into all of your little nooks and crannies all over your climbing surface. Takes 10-20 seconds to dry, and then you can just clap off or pat your pants and kind of get rid of the excess, and then you just have this primed hand that's ready to go. You can apply a little bit of loose chalk as you go. Like usually at that point you only really need it on your tips, so you can just end up using way less chalk if you use liquid chalk. um, we have a couple of different types. We have like an alcohol free version for people with sensitive skin, and then we have another version that we made to help gyms reopen during the pandemic. Other than that, most of the liquid chalk is that. The one thing you just want to make sure is there's no rosin in it. Like whatever brand you use, just rosin's no good.
I think I just realized maybe why I've had a bad experience. I didn't have a bad experience with liquid chalk, but I remember this one time where I used it and I think I just added more loose dry chalk afterwards and I got that slippery feeling because I was probably using too much. Yeah.
Hmm.
God, that's obvious now. You mentioned patting your pants just to get rid of excess chalk, but made me wonder, okay, like the chalk pat, like sometimes I will put chalk on my pants,
Hmm.
or sometimes I'll, when I'm deep water soloing, I will put uh, liquid chalk on my forearm, like on the back of my wrist, as kind of a
Hmm.
place to get to reach chalk. Any thoughts on ways to best use the expedited chalking up? Are pants like not the way to do it because maybe they have grease on them, or any thoughts on that?
I think there's a company that makes this pad. It's kind of like a knee pad, but it goes on your thigh that you can put chalk into it. And that's like sort of you'll get way more chalk out of it. The name of the company escapes me right now. And yeah, I was out climbing yesterday, and my buddy, he puts chalk all over his thighs. And I did point out at the end, I'm like, you realize like you put a lot of effort into that, and by the end of the session, like I don't think you touched your thigh once. Um, but I, I think so much of that stuff just kind of like the sport is so mental that like before we get started climbing, we do all these things, and I have a buddy who kind of like he equates it to like you're going into battle. You got to make sure that like you've got everything you need, because once you start climbing, you don't really get to like call in any reinforcements or anything like that. So I think whatever just puts you in the best mental spot, gives you the most confidence. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not like it's going to weigh you down or anything like that.
I'm, I know what you're saying. Where I think a lot of it is mental, and I often put chalk on my pants. I don't know if I've probably only actually touched them for any kind of use, maybe like a dozen times in my life or something. But it's also embarrassing because if I'm done with my session, I go out to dinner or something, my pants are just like covered in chalk. Like I don't know what normal people in the world think of, like I don't know, they must think I'm a painter or something, because no one in their right mind thinks that there's just some guy covered in chalk.
Yeah, I mean, when we first started, we would do a lot of chalk demos at climbing gyms, and the thing that I think really convinced a lot of people that we had something different was we would say like, like use our chalk, but then don't take a chalk bag and climb this route, and look at your hands at the end, and everyone would be like, no, I have to chalk up halfway up, and it's a climbing gym, so it's not like it's that tall. And the number of people who would get to the top and realize their hands all the way through the tips like were completely still covered with chalk, and a lot of times they could even climb a second route if they like, and like they still have good grip. A lot of our chalking behavior is ill-informed, I think, is probably the best way to say it. But good luck telling a climber to do something different.
Yeah. I mean, I will tell you that the the sweaty among us, aka me without antihydral, it I do need to chalk up more often, and the drier my skin has become, the more I'm like, oh, like I'll do a hangboard session, and
Mhm.
I won't have to chalk up between each time sometimes now, which before was, yeah, before was just unheard of. So I do think that, just like you're saying, everyone's different.
Mhm.
And on that note, every session is different. Every level of humidity is different. Um, do you think that a climber should do anything different if, let's say they go out and it's just 80, I was in Squamish. It was humid. Squamish is notoriously humid, especially in that beautiful forest. Is there anything we should think about doing differently if there's extra humidity or low humidity during a session?
Yeah, so if it's really humid out, that's kind of the place that liquid chalk really shines, or like kind of every so often spraying your hands with a little isopropyl alcohol. Even if you have chalk on them, just kind of like just to kind of nix some of the oils and like kind of dries out the skin. On the other side, if it's really dry out and you almost feel like you're going to dry fire, there's a number of climbers that will like just pour some water into their chalk and make it almost kind of like moist. Or there's that Rhino, I think it's Spit, I think is a product that they use. So like those things can kind of like help combat those situations. There's we've been doing a lot of experimentation with magnesium hydroxide carbonate, which is basically it has a water molecule on the magnesium carbonate, and that really seems to like that's something we're looking at when it comes to like both dry and humid conditions, and like how we can treat that compound beforehand. We have some comp climbers that are testing out some of our prototypes for that to see if it does well for us for them.
Whoa, whoa. I gotta hear more about this. It's like the future of chalk because it seems like one of the big insights you had was that chalk was not what people were saying it was. It was not pure. It wasn't really
Mm.
magnesium carbonate. And so that's a big insight. And then I love that you keep marching forward and saying, okay, like these different sizes of chalk. But now we're talking about changing it or adding in like a water molecule. Yeah, like what are these potential changes that could be done in chalk that, maybe just kicks up a whole nother notch?
Well, like Metolia says they're super chalk, right? So that's a chalk that has a drying agent in it, like that. I think it's like that silica gel type stuff that's in your in those little packets. It's similar to that. So for people who claim to be like mega sweaty and they need something like that adds a level of absorption. That stuff can also like interact with your skin like on an ongoing basis. Black Diamond uses an additive. There's a company, I think it was like out of Sweden or Finland or something like that, where they basically took magnesium carbonate and like turned a particle of it into like Swiss cheese so that it had more opportunity to dry things out. A lot of those types of compounds, I think for people who have like the hyperhidrosis, like the really crazy sweaty, that might help them. The feedback that we've gotten from a lot of climbers when we experiment with those sorts of things is it overly ends up drying the skin and they kind of get some cracks and things like that. But every climber's skin's different, so we should all be looking for our Goldilocks chalk that helps us. Same thing with shoes, right? Like every shoe that's out there, Scarpa's got what, like 75 different versions of shoes, or something like that. So yeah, when you find the one that fits you right, all of a sudden, a climb goes from impossible to not that bad. That's pretty cool. So so there's magnesium carbonate, and then there's all these different versions of magnesium carbonate, like this magnesium hydroxide carbonate. And from the research that we've done, I conclude that magnesium carbonate is the best compound to get a good grip in rock climbing and in other sports. Now, how that chalk ends up getting treated, like you can do a little bit of at home chemistry. Like if it's really hot out and you're in Squamish and it's like a really humid situation and your chalk doesn't feel that great, spread it out over a baking pan and just put it in the oven for an hour at like 350. Let it cool off before you use it. You're just going to get rid of any moisture that's in there whatsoever, and the less moisture that's there, the chalk has a better opportunity to absorb moisture. Again, Ned Fahaley, great climber out of the UK, he only uses like our tiny little bags of chalk because he just wants to use a little bit at a time, and he's really conscious about trying to keep the chalk extremely dry. Um, and then there's like Dai Koyamoto from Japan. He's like famous for showing up to the boulders with like three different chalk bags, and like one he has like he's poured water into, one he's like baked in an oven, and the other one I think is just normal. And he'll, depending on what shows up, because there's really different weird microclimates all like at different areas in Japan, whatever feels better that day, then he'll end up using that. I think you had a podcast with Carlo where he kind of talked about some of the things that he was doing in regards to this as well.
Yeah, it blew my freaking mind when Carlos told me all the different experiments he was running with freshly opened bags. What sounds like Ned's doing a similar thing, and I guess this all makes sense. Where my question was basically humidity and how that affects chalk usage, and humidity is water, moisture in the air, and so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think what really jumped out at me from what Carlo was doing, and sounds like what Ned and Di are doing, is that it goes back to this idea of if things aren't feeling good, here's a variable that you can change. Here's something you can play
Mm-hmm.
with, and that's what Carlos said that really I thought was great. Is he just was like sometimes because boy do conditions matter, and conditions on those micro tiny crimps in Yosemite really matter, and just that ability to change clearly our biggest connection point on the wall in just one dip of a bag or a new bag. That's yeah, that's powerful, man. That's
Mm-hmm.
good to know. I'm glad that you guys are playing around with adding a water molecule, and I don't know. It'd be wild if in the future you have these options to I can see you kind of like narrowing down into what the best solution is for you based on your level of moisture development, based on the conditions you're in. And yeah, dude, I can't believe how deep you guys go, but I appreciate it.
Well, when you're not that good at climbing, you kind of got to do everything you can to give yourself a shot at sending your project. So,
I
yeah.
well I mean, this is the thing that's funny is when I talked to Carlo about his experience on the dark side, I've known Carlo for a long time, and Carlo is very good at climbing.
Yeah,
Carlo is
that's good.
extremely good at climbing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I really respected about that journey he went on with the dark side is that it just showed me that when you really care and you want to send, he pulled out every trick he could in the books. And I think that's something that excellence always has is really trying to optimize everything. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why I wanted to talk to you, Kevin, is like I of course I want to have the best chalk experience I can have, and that's why I've been avid user since you guys came out, because I noticed the difference, and now talking to you, I think I can see why. So is is there anything we didn't cover when it comes to that kind of chemistry and physics? I think the whole pH stuff, I don't know if I totally understand. Like there's like can you say again why pH of the chalk matters? I understand that like we make a pH too. I don't know if I quite understood that. Can we do that again?
So the pH really has to come down to like the hardness or softness of the magnesium carbonate. So you can kind of manipulate that, and it can, if the pH is on one end, it will make it feel really hard, like almost like a rock, or a pebble. Like sometimes you'll feel in your chalk bag or bucket at the end of like when it's time to like refill it, you'll feel like these weird like hard pebbly things, and you'll think it might be a rock. It could just be chalk that's gotten too much moisture in it, or in like the way that it dried in your bag. And then on the other end, if the pH is in a different range, then the chalk just gets like it's almost too soft, and that softness, it just kind of like falls apart and then ends up feeling slippery as well. So there's this like range when you're creating the solution that ends up being the solid forms of chalk, the chunks, and the like the blocks and the discs and things like that, that really impacts how much, when you have that thing, the transferability, like how much chalk, like if you want to, like if you just took some chalk out of your bag and mixed it with some water from your tap water, put it in a bowl and let it dry, and then tried to use that as chalk, you would be like, none of this is rubbing on my hand very well. This isn't work, like this like the chalk was fine before I did this. Now it's not working very well. That a lot of that comes down to like this interaction with pH. That's how it ends up kind of performing. And I don't want to be too cagey, but that's like sort of that was like the one of the big things we figured out early on, and it's one of the reasons why our chalk feels different than others. We're the only manufacturer of chalk in the U.S. Most folks have have other companies make their chalk and then they just kind of put their labels on it and stuff like that. There's lots of great chalks out there. I'm not saying like it's only Friction Labs. Just trying to give people insight into how they're making their choices around chalk, because I think there's not a lot of transparency in this world of chalk. And then when you talk about like how chalk gets synthesized, right? Like if you manufacture rubber, one of the byproducts is magnesium carbonate. But because of the way that that is synthesized, it's totally different than if you synthesize it from magnesite, like the mineral magnesite. And then you can also get chalk as a byproduct from desalination. So like desalination takes a lot of energy. It kind of pumps some weird stuff back into the ocean. But one of the byproducts is magnesium carbonate from that. And that magnesium carbonate is so fine, it can end up feeling different than like the chalk that we have. But again, like you get 100 climbers in a room and put out all the different brands of chalk, they're like 100% of them are not going to all gravitate to the same thing. Like we all have different skin, we all have something that feels different, and for whatever reason we're going to gravitate towards those different ones. So luckily there's a lot of options for climbers, and hopefully they can find the thing that helps them perform the best. Same thing with shoes and like all the other gear that we use.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't want to make you give up all the secrets. But I have a little bit of a background in chemistry and physics, and so I just appreciate you really going into it, because in some ways that's what is happening on, there's a microscopic level of why it works. And I love that you're able to just pick it apart. And this is like kind of off topic, but it sounds like magnesium carbonate, like it's cool that it's like a something that comes from the earth that it's almost like a rock, or like it's almost like a
Mineral.
rock, yeah,
Hmm.
mineral, and
Hmm.
then we use it to climb rocks. I don't know. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I always enjoyed the fact that somehow our connection with nature and the rock is enhanced by more nature and rock. And it also is fascinating to me that magnesium carbonate comes out of so many processes. It makes me think like it's just this ubiquitous common thing, but then to get it right, there's a right way and a wrong way. And so
But yeah, I mean, a lot like if you think about coffee, if you think about flour, if you think about sugar, like all these things are like it's not that different. Like the preparation, the source, it ends up really impacting things. Like there's a reason that the croissants in France taste better. Like it's like it's like what you start with, how you treat it, and like the product that you develop from it can all just be really vastly different than just saying chalk is chalk.
damn, I wish you could recreate the croissants in France here, but that's you just can't. That's the water. Well, then I'm going to ask you one more question, because I feel like there's a common conception that chalk is just chalk, and that you guys are just doing what everyone else is doing and just marketing it up. And I think you've explained why that's not the case. But is all these processes that you have to go through to achieve these sizes, these particle sizes, these pH? Is it? I'm guessing it's a little more expensive.
It is a little bit more expensive. I think when we first started the business, we were known as the expensive chalk. If you look at a like per ounce cost of chalk across the whole, all of the products that are out there, we're really there's actually plenty of brands that are more expensive than we are. You kind of end up you get what you pay for, and then there is the how long does your chalk last you. You can spend less on a unit of chalk, but you might end up buying way more units of that chalk and going through it faster. So The good news is that there are so many options available that a climber for a nominal amount of money could buy a couple of different brands and figure out which chalk really performs best for them. And then, like, so long as those brands have consistency in what they're delivering, then like you should be set and off to the races. Like we quality control every batch that we make. We do everything right here in Denver, Colorado. We treat our employees well. We've got health benefits and 401k match and all that sort of stuff. So like, we try and run a responsible business and treat people well. All those things factor into the cost at the end of the day. And we're not like we're not rolling in dough over here. We're just trying to make really good products and help athletes perform their best, and hopefully get out to the boulders a little bit ourselves.
Yeah, I love that, man. I mean, I just love that you guys care. As I mentioned before, this isn't an advertisement, and I've had other people who manufacture things, and the thing that really gets me is when people just really freaking care about what they're doing. And, that's how you come up with good products. And I mean, yeah, just talking to you really shows why I've been such a big Friction Labs user. I don't know, you guys went deep. I love
Appreciate
that
that.
you're still like thinking about what's next and calling out Ned and Di and Carlo and their usage and like trying to figure out how that works for, new comp climbers. And I don't know. Very cool, man. I appreciate that you raised the level of chalk as a whole, because it sounds like other companies are trying to follow suit too, which is just good contribution to the community. Because dude, chalk is just like I said, I'm covered in it. I eat it on accident. It's been kind of with me in every sport I've done, and so I just jumped at the opportunity to get to learn more about it. And that that's my last question: is there anything that is there anything I didn't ask about chalk that I should have? I'm trying to like go through my prep. Like I was climbing last night. Like what was I doing? Is there anything I should know about brushing? That sounds like just brush off all the particles. I sometimes I brush footholds. Is that just me being
Mhm.
crazy? Or even putting chalk? I mean, I put chalk on my brush and brush footholds. Is that should I not do that?
Yeah, I think I'm not a shoe rubber expert, but from the folks that I've talked to and like the different like shoe cleaning sprays and things that are out there, I don't think you want to chalk your footholds. I think a little dab on the outside so you can see where it is, so long as you brush it off afterwards. Personally, that always helps me. Getting old, 47, so trying to see all the footholds sometimes can be a little challenging, but yeah, I think in general you want your footholds to be really clean. You want to brush all your holds. You want to make sure you're using a thin layer of chalk. I think if you can do anything to get a small breeze, climbing at the right times or bringing a fan with you, all those things kind of set you up for the most success that you can possibly have. And look, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. I've nerded out on chalk for the last decade of my life. I feel bad for my wife sometimes, the amount of chalk that we talk about. So it's nice to talk to someone else who's also equally as interested in it.
Dude, it's the lifeblood of climbing. And I think I realized that I don't actually chalk up feet. What it is, it's outside. When you like find a new foot and you're like, and it's more
Mhm.
visual. You're like, oh, I need to like
Yeah.
know that it's there. Yeah, okay. I won't chalk up feet in the gym. I apologize to whoever I've done that to. It's part of my ritual sometimes. Yeah, how like I feel like even when other people have brushed the climb for me before I go, I have to brush
Mhm.
anyways. I get into that zone. Well, I usually ask about good to great, and I just want to give you the opportunity too. You've climbed really well, and you've created a bunch of great companies. And what do you think it takes to go from good to great?
Yeah, I think you got to care. Like I think in climbing, we tend to obsess about things, and sometimes the word obsess has a lot of negative connotations to it. But there's a healthy level of obsession, and it's super rewarding when you're working your project and you figure out that micro beta of oh, I put my wrist at this angle or my hip at this angle, and all of a sudden everything clicks. Um, there's that part of obsession, and then there's like if you're operating a business, making sure that it's, you know, it's fulfilling something more than just the revenue. Like that's not really a great reason. And you know, like I said, I'm an okay climber. I love rock climbing. You know, my family. I don't think there's been a Father's Day that my kids have not gotten me something related to climbing, and they know that we're always going out climbing. Um, yeah, like to do like whether it was like the, you know, helping to start the DBC, what we've been able to do at Friction Labs, like being able to give back to this thing that's like given me so much direction in life has been mega rewarding. Yeah, it's been super awesome.
I love this community, and I love that advice of caring. I mean, I felt like that was what I was saying, and I'm glad to hear it was echoed by you that that was what I was catching on to. Well, I'm going to go over my kind of list that I just built in my head of best practices. It's keep your skin clean, and isopropyl alcohol is a good way to do that. Perhaps liquid chalk
Mhm.
with isopropyl alcohol if you don't have carrying it around you. Stay hydrated because that seems to probably help with that. I don't know, elasticity, something with your skin. Definitely stay
Mhm.
hydrated. Don't apply too much chalk, which I found really interesting, and make sure that just like your hands being clean, that the holds are as clean as can be. That if those holds are wet, that chalk is probably not the solution. And also just be careful climbing on wet holds, you guys. It's yeah,
Mhm.
don't break those classics. And then if you're having a bad experience, you can quickly change conditions by using a bit of water, maybe cleaning your hands using a bit of water. And if you're having a good experience, then maybe pay attention to those things that are going on. And that if you could even have these different experiences based on your diet, because pH is an important part of chalk, and we our sweat will produce a pH based on our lifestyle. And so, you know, pay attention to that, good or
Mhm.
bad. Um, and yeah, try real hard. And did I miss anything else in there?
No, I think the only thing is on the back end when you're done climbing, like ultimately your skin health really determines like the success of your session. Like everyone knows, like if you smashed yourself on your project yesterday and you wake up and you can barely hold your cup of coffee because your tips hurt too much, going climbing is not like a super enjoyable experience. Where other days when your skin's in really great condition, it is. So when you're done climbing, wash the chalk off your hands so that your hands your skin can start to recover. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't put a plug in. We have a new product called Athletic Hands that we've worked with some dermatologists that work with burn victims that really helps with your skin recovery. So whether it's that product or some other sort of moisturizer, there's a lot of options that are out there. Um, Trying to get the skin hydrated so that it can start regrowing, so that you're fresh for your next session, whether it's later that day or the next day, or if you're an old guy like me, usually a couple of days later. That's you set yourself up for the best success.
So what is the best practices for skin farming? Let's say you're using the Friction Labs product that helps you with that.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, like how often do you apply it? Should you, should you let your skin get moist? Should you not? You know, do you wash your dishes with gloves on? Just to, what's the best way to be a skin farmer?
You know, I think the you know the when you see a bunch of climbers and they're all holding their hands out of the hot tub at night, like I don't think that does anything for you. I like personally. I think if you're you wouldn't, I don't think you'd want to wash your dishes right before you go climbing. But afterwards, I don't think it's the worst thing, especially if you have a night to let your skin dry out before you're going to go climb the next day. You don't want your skin like saturated, like you just got out of the pool and your skin's all wrinkly. That's not a good spot to be in. You also don't want your skin so dry that it's cracking and it feels, you know, you're like you run it over a sweater and you kind of pull off half your sweater. That's not a good spot to be either. Like you healthy skin performs well. Healthy skin is elastic. Healthy skin is hydrated. So you want healthy skin the same way that like, hey, we're all training, we're all like eating the right foods, we're all like trying to get a good night of sleep before we go. If you're trying to stack the deck and like in your favor so that you have the best chance of sending, you want healthy skin. And healthy skin is hydrated and elastic skin.
Is there any differences if you say have a big flapper? How would a dermatologist recommend that you heal a flapper?
Well, so skin grows from the inside out, sort of like an onion, and like the most exterior layers. So as climbers, we tend to like obsess on like what's going on in like the most outside layer, right? So um, if you put like a beeswax or something like that, that really just traps a little bit of moisture underneath the beeswax, but it's not triggering the skin to start to grow from the inside out. Um, so like if you just have like a moisturizer, like some shea butter, it's going to hydrate the skin, but it's not going to like it's not going to like trigger it to start growing more. We use a compound called copper tripeptide 1. I think it's probably going to become quite popular in years to come. But there's like 40 PubMed articles about how that actually causes the cells in your dermis to start growing skin. Um, so for the nerds out there that love to dive deep in that stuff, you can Google that and read some of the PubMed articles and things like that. Try our new product, Athletic Hands. Um, but like in general, like keeping your skin hydrated, like climbers do a lot of weird things. I remember being in Waco a long time ago and someone told me that, they get their tea kettle really hot and then they like singe the tips of like their tips to try and like make them better. We use antihedral and all these other things that are out there. Um, if it works for you, good on you. Like whatever you find works well for you. You just make sure that whatever you're doing is good for the long haul as well.
Pretty sure antihydral or hedral is bad for me. I sometimes I think about I used to get this stuff sometimes from Germany that was for like foosball players. I remember like
Hmm.
looking at, I think it had like formaldehyde in it. I just knew
Yeah.
this is bad. And I care so much about my diet and everything, but I care even more about sending. I will sacrifice my health for it. Well, that I appreciate you dispelling a bit of those myths because I caught some flack for the idea that moisture when healing is actually good, not bad. So I actually my kind of I don't want to say my skincare routine. What I found is that if I'm using if my hands become abnormally dry from antihydral from a dry climate, I actually will take a bath and like soak my face. Like I want my hands to have moisture because this came from my mom who's a doctor and she said, look, when we have injuries, abrasions, that there's a reason you put Neosporin and a band-aid. You do want some moisture, and then you need to take it off and let it dry. And
Hmm.
then you need to
Yeah.
reapply and get moisture. And so that ability to have that Goldilocks in between is kind of what you've been saying the whole time for a lot of things is not too dry, not too wet, just right.
Skin's our biggest organ, so you got to take care of it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we probably already covered it, but if we didn't, do you have a pro tip for us, Kevin?
Use less chalk and brush your holds. I think that you'd be doing everyone a good favor if everyone did that.
But Kevin, then we'll buy less chalk.
That's just fine.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, brush your holds, please. And I don't know if I can use less chalk, man. It's like a mental thing. I totally like am in there with my bucket. It's covering my mouth. It's definitely a mental thing, but I like that if I'm feeling slippery or anything, I think I'll use that as an indicator that hey, maybe I chalked up a little too much, and I'll give a little clap. But good stuff, man. Thanks for caring. Thanks for sharing literally every single question I ever had about chalk. Please let us know if there's any new big invention in chalk. I mean, it sounds like you guys are really pushing the forefront.
We got a couple things coming down the pike, so just Friction Labs, our Instagram, or go to our website, sign up for the email list. That's the first place to know about all of our stuff.
Yeah, very cool. I'll plug the company for you. Again, Kevin, you're the founder of Friction Labs. And I know you guys have a great Instagram with a ton of followers. And yeah, your website is, I believe it's frictionlabs.com. And,
Yep. Yep.
you know, thanks for educating us, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity, Josh. This is fun.
All right, Kevin, take care. Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.